Coming up in our newscast tonight. Ahead of his trip to Europe, President Moon Jae-in sits down for a one-on-one with the BBC. Among other things, during the interview, the South Korean leader expresses confidence that it's only a matter of time the state of war in Korea will come to an end. President Moon emphasizes the importance of creating a peaceful zone along the northern limit line in the West Sea. Along with the nation's defense chief, he highlights the need to work towards that goal to prevent more soldiers from having to risk their lives guarding the border. South Korea posts positive employment numbers in September. 45,000 new jobs were added compared to last year. However, there's a downward trend in the service sector, partly due to structural changes. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Choi. President Moon Jae-in held an interview with BBC before taking off to a 9-day Europe trip. He said declaring the end of the Korean War would be a proof of improved relations between Pyongyang and Washington, and that it should happen soon. Park Hee-jun has our top story.
It's only a matter of time before Pyongyang and Washington call it an end to the state of war on the divided peninsula, said President Moon Jae-in just a day before embarking on a tour around Europe, where Moon is expected to seek support for establishing permanent peace in Northeast Asia. Speaking to BBC Friday, the president described his North Korean counterpart as candid and polite and said that the official declaration to the decades-long Korean War is a political statement signifying the end of hostile relations between the North and the U.S. President Moon also touched upon the latest developments between Seoul and Washington in regards to U.S. President Trump's comments on easing North Korea's sanctions, to which he said Seoul won't lift any sanctions without consulting with Washington. The South Korean leader said the situation on the Korean peninsula wouldn't have come this far without the layers of economic sanctions put on Pyongyang by the international community. Moon also said he sees Trump's comments as a means to keep such sanctions relevant and under close monitoring by Seoul and Washington until more steps are taken over the denuclearization of the peninsula. President Moon said he believes the international measures to rein in the regime will be soon eased once Pyongyang proves itself as being committed to denuclearization. The president said he hopes to expand the level of support from his EU counterparts in regards to the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula during his week-long trip across Europe. The president said he feels confident the denuclearization process will unfold without major hurdles, adding that he looks forward to round 2 of the summit between Pyongyang and Washington. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
President Moon has called for establishing peace on the country's western maritime border known as the Northern Limit Line. Seoul's defense minister also reaffirmed the nation's intent to work towards creating a conflict-free zone in that area. Kan Young-woo tells us more.
Speaking at an assignment and promotion ceremony of 2 high-ranked military commanders at the presidential office of Cheongwade on Friday, President Moon Jae-in said that the Northern Limit Line in the West Sea is a maritime border that our soldiers have defended with their blood. Saying that defending the country's borders is a noble responsibility, but doing so at the cost of blood cannot continue, Moon added that defending the maritime border without sacrificing lives would be a much more valuable accomplishment. Moon said that North Korea, unlike the past, has consistently acknowledged the Northern Limit Line during this year's inter-Korean summits and called for laying the groundwork to create a conflict-free zone in the West Sea. On the same day, South Korea's Defense Minister Chung Kyung-do said that the 2 Koreas will continue to make progress on turning the West Sea into a peaceful maritime zone by implementing the military agreements outlined in the Pyeongyang Declaration. During his opening remark at the 16th Western Pacific Naval Symposium in Jeju Island, the defense minister said that peace isn't free, but that it must be earned and protected, adding that achieving peace through power is the government's unwavering national security goal. The 2 Koreas have had a number of disputes and armed conflicts over the Northern Limit Line as Pyongyang had refused to recognize the border drawn by the United Nations Command at the end of the Korean War in 1953. Kan Young-woo, Arirang News.
South and North Korea held working-level talks this morning. The meeting lasted around an hour. The two sides agreed on a number of practical issues for their implementation of the military agreement signed at last month's Inter-Korean Summit in Pyeongyang, including demilitarizing the joint security area and the withdrawal of some guard posts on a trial basis. 4 delegates from each side attended the talks. Army Colonel Cho Yong-gun led the southern side, and Colonel Chung-nam was in charge of the north. Seoul and Pyongyang also checked up on progress in the removal of landmines at the JSA and at sites where they're jointly excavating war remains. North Korea has proposed the talks on Monday. Next week, the two Koreas will hold their first high-level talks since their summit in September. Seoul's Unification Ministry announced the meeting will be held on Monday at the Peace House on the South Korean side of Panmunjom. The South Korean delegation is led by Unification Minister Jo Myung-kyun. He will be joined by the vice ministers of departments related to items in the Pyeongyang Joint Declaration. The two sides will discuss ways to implement the declaration, which aims to promote peace and prosperity on the peninsula. Pyongyang continues to press Washington to alleviate sanctions. The U.S. is firm that such measures cannot be loosened until real denuclearization is seen. In fact, according to our Oh Jung-hee, America is upping the pressure, even blocking humanitarian visits to the regime.
Continue the sanctions, we won't give in, says North Korea. Pyongyang state-run newspaper Nodong Sinmun released an op-ed on Friday. It didn't explicitly mention or target the United States, but strongly denounced the international sanctions, saying that Pyongyang's, quote, enemies are intensifying them. The op-ed says these so-called enemies think North Korea will give up in the end, but it won't. Pyongyang, it says, will instead keep up with its self-reliant spirit to ultimately build a strong state despite external influences. Recently, North Korea has been calling for the international sanctions to be eased because it has taken steps towards denuclearization. But the U.S. is firm in keeping the pressure on North Korea. And recently, this appears to be not only through economic sanctions, but restrictions on humanitarian aid as well. According to the Wall Street Journal, Washington is blocking aid workers from traveling to the north, and the decision maker is the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. The reason, apparently, the possibility that North Korea could misuse the humanitarian assistance for its nuclear weapons program. Meanwhile, there are growing calls from other corners, too, for sanctions relief, namely China and Russia, as the North works to strengthen ties with its traditional allies. Just this week, the vice foreign ministers of Pyongyang, Beijing, and Moscow had three-way talks where they called on the UN Security Council to review the sanctions and for the relevant parties to take reciprocal actions. With the U.S. determined to keep the sanctions in place until denuclearization happens, it's not clear what crucial common ground Pyongyang and Washington will be able to find next in their nuclear negotiations. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
It's day 3 of the National Assembly audit. The rival parties hotly contested the government's minimum wage hike and energy policies. Kim Min-ji has the latest from Parliament.
A heated issue at the audit of the SME Ministry on Friday was the government's income-led growth policies, especially the minimum wage hike. The opposition parties claim the small business owners have been forced to shut down or cut the number of their part-time workers because of the additional costs. The minimum wage was raised 16.4% this year and is headed for another hike of almost 11% in 2019. The opposition also criticized the government for pumping in taxpayer money to soften the blow.
When small business owners were upset about the minimum wage hike, did you raise the issue with the government as a minister that should be protecting these people's interests?
Yes, I passed on their views to the government. The government's stance is that we provide support measures at the same time that we raise the minimum wage. We believe these two approaches taken simultaneously are more effective in boosting people's livelihoods than scrapping both.
The ruling party acknowledged that while there have been unintended consequences, structural issues are to blame, arguing that what's needed is a change in economic paradigm, even if there are negative effects along the way.
For the past decade, we've taken the approach of investing to breathe life into the economy and create jobs, but it didn't work. So now what we're trying to do is increase people's disposable income, which in turn will spur consumption. There have been hiccups, so we're using fiscal means to overcome it.
You're right. The approach taken in the past has led to low growth and polarization, and now to take care of this problem, we're using income growth policies.
At the Science Committee audit, under the microscope was the government's drive for nuclear-free energy. The opposition criticized the plans, pointing out potential side effects such as a decline in energy supply, while the ruling party defended the initiative, saying it's a path the country will have to take eventually and that it was taken in consideration of people's safety. During the audit of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, rival parties clashed over whether North Korea acknowledges the northern limit line a de facto maritime border. The conservative opposition said that the North does not recognize it since it was drawn unilaterally by the UN command, while the JCS and the ruling party said that because the two Koreas have agreed to transform the area into a maritime peace zone, it means that it does acknowledge it. It's been a critical issue as a number of clashes have occurred near the border. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
South Korea's Trade Ministry submitted a bill to the National Assembly to ratify the revised FTA with the United States. It was signed by the leaders of the two countries last month and includes agreements concerning the investor-state dispute settlement procedures, anti-dumping measures, and standards for car imports. It also calls for Seoul to double its threshold for American car imports from the current 25,000 units under the condition that they conform to safety regulations equivalent to Korea's. The Parliament's ratification of the bill is the final domestic procedure required before the deal takes effect. The government hopes to have all domestic procedures taken care of by the end of the year. South Korea's job situation finally saw some positive developments in September following a string of lackluster data in the months prior. There were some 45,000 newly employed people compared to the same period last year. Kim Ji-yeon helped us look beyond the numbers.
The number of newly employed in Korea climbed modestly in September, providing partial relief after the employment shock seen in the months of July and August. Data by Statistics Korea shows 45,000 people were newly employed in September, with the total number of people in the workforce tallied at over 27 million. The health and social services sectors accounted for most of the job gains, followed by telecommunications as well as farming and fisheries sectors. Meanwhile, the number of newly employed people in the rental services, wholesale and retail sectors, as well as lodging and food industries, dropped on year last month.
Structural changes in the services sector are also cited as culprits for the falling number of jobs. More restaurants and hotels are opting for self-service booths and stands, and the expansion of online shopping malls are inducing companies to hire less.
The number of new jobs in the manufacturing sector, meanwhile, rose by a mere 42,000 last month compared to a year ago, mainly due to the prolonged slump in the shipbuilding and auto sectors, which have been undergoing restructuring.
Local car manufacturers usually have a large chain of suppliers, and they're the ones most affected by a slump that directly leads to falling jobs figures. There could be up to 4 tiers of subcontractors that supply components and accounts for a combined 70% of the total procurement costs in assembling auto units.
Korea's jobless rate overall stood at 3.6% last month, which is a 0.3 percentage point increase from the same period last year. The youth unemployment rate decreased by 0.4 percentage points on year to stand at 8.8%, but the real youth unemployment rate rose to its highest level since related data was first compiled in 2015 to 22.7% last month. To address the employment situation, the Ministry of Economy and Finance says it will unveil additional measures next week to boost the number of quality jobs. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The nation's finance ministry released its monthly assessment of local economic conditions based on key data such as exports, job growth, and investment. It shows the government's growing concerns over domestic and external risks. Kim Hye-sung zooms in on October's Green Book.
The Ministry of Economy and Finance took out the word recovery from its monthly Green Book report. It said domestically the Korean economy is backed by solid exports and consumption, but investment and job growth remains sluggish, and external uncertainty is growing because of the escalating U.S.-China trade spat and rising oil prices. Since last December, the finance ministry had said the local economy is on a steady recovery path, making it the first time this year the word recovery has not been mentioned.
The report comes amid growing concerns over the escalating U.S.-China trade conflict, which could start to really affect Korea's exports and major Korean companies. Just as the IMF cuts its growth forecast for the global economy and the Korean economy, the Korean government is also seeing the possibility of such downside risks affecting the local economy.
It's also the first time that the Green Book pointed out that job growth is sluggish. Job growth has improved from an on-year gain of just 3,000 in August to 45,000 in September, but it's still below the 100,000 mark and unemployment is at 3.6%. Exports dropped over 8% on year in September, recording $50.6 billion, which the government said was mainly due to 4 fewer working days due to the Chuseok holiday, given that daily average exports hit a record high. Consumption stood pat in August, while industrial output expanded by 0.5% on month in August thanks to autos and plastics. Both facilities and construction investment have fallen for the past 6 months, down by 1.4% and 1.3% on month in September, respectively. The finance ministry said it will boost the economy through expansionary fiscal policy and help create jobs through innovative growth. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
Yesterday, South Korea's benchmark index suffered its largest daily drop in almost 7 years. The KOSPI bounced back during midday trading and closed more than 1.5% higher than the previous session. Ko Ryun-hee breaks down the digits for us.
In Friday's session, Korea's main index closed at over 2,160, recovering some of what was lost on Thursday when it plunged more than 4%. The KOSPI added 1.51% to close at just under 2,162 for the first gain in 9 sessions. Analysts attribute the recent string of losses to the rising trade tensions between China and the U.S. and fears of contagion in emerging markets. This is because many Korean companies depend greatly on exports to these economies.
U.S. is the second largest export destination for Korea, and Korean firms have substantial investment in U.S., and U.S. firms have substantial investment in Korea. So whenever U.S. Stock market moves, Korea stock market tends to move the same way.
In midday trading Friday, the index briefly touched the 2,170 mark as foreigners and institutions looked for bargains. Also, U.S. inflation pressure has softened slightly.
The fear of inflation that I mentioned has lessened somewhat because U.S. just issued a report, inflation report, and September inflation rose only 0.1% during the month.
Meanwhile, Korea's tech-heavy junior index, the KOSDAQ, closed at 731.5, up almost 3.5% from the previous session. The Korean currency closed at over 1,131 against the U.S. dollar, up 13 won from the previous close. Ko Ryun-hee, Arirang News.
The South Korean government has reaffirmed its promise to shut down a foundation on Japan's wartime sex slavery victims created as part of a controversial 2015 agreement between Seoul and Tokyo regarding the issue. That's coming from the Minister of Gender Equality and Family, who made the remarks while visiting the House of Sharing, the victim shelter in Gwangju. For details, let's turn to our Choi Chi-young.
During a meeting with victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery on Thursday, South Korea's newly appointed gender minister promised to immediately settle the issue regarding a Japanese-funded foundation that had been set up to aid the victims.
I promise to rightly resolve the foundation issue and will continually consult with you on the ways to settle the issue.
The Reconciliation and Healing Foundation, created 7 months after the 2015 agreement between Seoul and Tokyo on victims of sexual slavery, has been at the center of heated controversy here in South Korea. The Japanese government injected roughly 10 billion won, or roughly $10 million to fund the body, to provide 100 million won to each of the 34 living victims, and 20 million won in total to the 38 family members of deceased victims. However, many surviving victims and civic groups have rejected the body, saying that the Tokyo government had failed to take full legal responsibility for its past war crimes.
The minister has an urgent task to do, which is to disband the Reconciliation and Healing Foundation.
Last month at the summit with Japanese Prime Minister Abe, President Moon signaled that he would disband the foundation, saying the foundation is not working properly and was doomed to fail. Yonhap Television News reported that the South Korean Foreign Ministry has already notified the Japanese government of its intent to dissolve the foundation. Choi Xiong, Arirang News.
Shifting gears to a different story now, Siberian tigers, or Paektusan tigers as they're known here, are an endangered species like most wild cats. So it was an exciting moment for the Korean public when they finally got to see 4 cubs that were born at a local zoo earlier this year. Woo Si-young gets us better acquainted with the little ones.
Fluffy, playful and chock full of beans, a litter of Siberian tiger cubs scamper around in a park near Seoul. The Seoul Grand Park on Friday unveiled the 4 new tiger cubs who were born earlier this year to a 9-year-old tiger called Penza. It was the first time in 5 years that tigers of their kind were born at the park, and it's considered a rarity that a mother gives birth to 4 cubs at once. The cubs are just over 5 months old and are a healthy 30 kilograms. According to officials at the park, they remain super attached to their mother and are still in the process of forming their own personalities. Siberian tigers are the largest subspecies of the cat family, and most live in the eastern forests of Russia. They also used to inhabit the Korean peninsula, which is why they're known locally as Paektusan tigers, named after a famous mountain on the North Korea-China border. However, due to intensive logging and development, as well as tiger poaching in China for use in traditional medicine, only an estimated 500 Siberian tigers are left on our planet today. That's why these purebred cubs come as a delight to the public.
I've never seen baby tigers before. The babies were so cute.
We normally think of tigers as strong and brave animals, and they also symbolize our country. But they're adorable in real life.
But these 4 baby cubs wouldn't have been born without a bit of matchmaking.
To procure the genes, we introduced Penza from Russia and Joseph from Czech Republic, but Joseph wasn't up for it at first. So to awaken his male instincts, we got him to compete with a couple of other males. Then he began to see Penza and fell in love.
Various attempts to bring the parents together, the birth of the cubs in May, and the early weeks of their lives have all been recorded by park officials. Parts of the year-long footage have already reached 1.2 million views on YouTube. Woo Si-young, Arirang News.
South Korea's largest annual sporting competition for local athletes is back. The 99th National Sports Festival kicked off today with an opening ceremony in Iksan, Jeolla-do province. Won Jong-han provides a glimpse of what to expect from this year's edition.
For a full week every October, the nation's highest-level athletes gather to compete at the annual sporting competition held in the country. And this year's edition kicked off with an opening ceremony in Iksan, Jeolla-do province on Friday evening.
I hereby declare the opening of the 99th National Sports Festival in Jeolla-do province for citizens nationwide and all the athletes taking part.
Some 25,000 athletes from the country's 17 provinces and major cities will compete in 46 medal events in 14 cities and counties across Jeolla-do province until next Thursday. While the athletes ranging from high school students to Olympic medalists have gathered here at the province, everyone has one goal in mind: to win a gold medal in front of their home fans. Among the athletes, heroes from the 2018 Asian Games are once again vying for a spot at the podium, except this time they're competing on home soil against their former teammates. Gold medal winners like Kim So-young, Jung Hae-rim, and Na-rim are all ready for action to continue their sporting success. A large spotlight has also been cast on the MVP of last year's event, swimmer Park Tae-hwan, who is looking to win his 6th MVP award at this year's Games. Looking briefly ahead towards next year, the National Sports Festival will hold its 100th centennial event, with the Seoul government pushing to secure North Korea's participation in the Games. Won Jong-han, Arirang News, Iksan.
Time to turn to Michelle Bach at the Weather Center for the updates you need before planning your weekend. Michelle, the warm afternoon rapidly turned chilly, and for the time being, this is expected to continue, I believe.
That's right, Daniel. Now, the mercury gets near 20 degrees Celsius and then drops more than 10 degrees into the evening as soon as the sun sets. Now, just by looking at the lows, these readings are the readings that we would normally see in November. So make sure you are able to stay warm throughout the whole day. Now, the sky is looking clear through our Saturday afternoon, but a little bit cloudy over in the southern regions. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, it continues to rain. And the morning lows are going to stay 4 to 7 degrees below the seasonal average. Seoul beginning the weekend morning at 6 degrees, and Daegu at 5 and Gyeongju at 4 degrees. Now, during the day, Seoul is expected to rise up to 19 degrees, while Gwangju and Daegu and Busan are a few notches higher as well. And the temperatures are expected to recover from Sunday through middle of next week, but then they'll fall once more. But the good news is that the sky will stay clear. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
These are the stories we could pack into tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Thank you for staying with us. Here's wishing you an incredible weekend.